Sam Darnold headed to Seattle, 3 years, around $110 million, $55 million guaranteed. 100.5. It's late breaking news. I thought it was 110. It's around 100.5. $55 million guaranteed. Here's how Sam did in the regular season with the Vikings. Had the third best record, had the fifth most passing yards, fifth most touchdowns with 35, passer rating at 102, and he had a ton of 100-point passer rating games. 20-yard completions, a lot of them to Justin Jefferson. He had 62 of them. That was the NFL's best. So, Brew, your reaction to Sam Darnold to the Seahawks?
Well, I don't think this changes any fortunes for Seattle, but considering the numbers, $55 million guaranteed, 3 years, $100 million, I can live with that. That's a number where you certainly can put pieces around it. They already have Jackson Smith and Jigma, pretty good running game, Kenneth Walker. So I think that's fine. I've said all along that I would not give big money. If I were another team, I would not give big money to Sam Darnold. They didn't give, relatively speaking, big money to him, but it's enough to keep him happy. It's kind of like the Baker Mayfield situation. Right. Baker had the one good year in Tampa Bay, and they rewarded him with a similar contract. So I'm fine with it because of the numbers, Nick. I'll be interested. If he has a great year this year, then I'll really be impressed, and I'll start giving him some props. He was great last year, but I thought he was in a great situation. He won't have that benefit this year, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and it is almost identical to the Baker deal, but it comes a year after the Baker deal. So when you kind of adjust for the NFL salary cap inflation, it is in the current market a better bargain than the Baker deal, which it should be because he's not as good of a quarterback as Baker Mayfield, and I don't think he's as good of a quarterback as Geno Smith. So I know he had a better year last year than Geno Smith. Seattle, this is a little puzzling to me. I think they pretty clearly just got worse at quarterback. Now, I know they got a second-round pick in the moving off Geno Smith's, and that is valuable. But it feels to me like this is a mistake teams make a little too often, which is falling in love with a guy who had a great game against you. The last great Sam Darnold moment, maybe the greatest Sam Darnold moment of his career, was the game against Seattle. That was where he made the best throw of his career. That was when he kind of thrusted himself into the edges of the MVP conversation. And so it feels to me like, and I understand the new offensive coordinator there, Clint Kubiak, they feel like he is going to, that Darnold maybe can run his scheme well, is I guess what I've read. I just think Geno Smith obviously has a much better body of work. I think he's a better player. He also, both of them have only been in one career playoff game. They both lost, but Geno in his playoff game at least acquitted himself fine, and he was clearly at a massive disadvantage playing the number one defense in the league, San Francisco, a few years ago, and that wasn't the case for Darnold. So I don't understand Seattle's rationale here. I understand why Vegas wanted Geno because Pete Carroll's there. When I saw that Seattle was moving on from Lockett, moving on from Metcalf, moving on from Geno, I said, oh, okay, they're doing a kind of a quick turnaround rebuild, maybe looking quarterback in the draft or maybe looking bridge guy. This isn't really a bridge contract, so this is a little puzzling to me, KW.
Nick, I don't hate your Geno's better than Darnold take. I tend to agree with that. At least Geno's shown more of a capability to kind of carry a team without being in the ideal circumstances. Not that he's elite, but he has shown he can carry you to some degree. Darnold's never shown that. The one thing I will give Darnold, though, against Geno is this. We know what Geno is. We know exactly what Geno is, which is a good quarterback, right? But he's not going to be elite. Darnold, I guess, obviously Shanahan liked him, talked highly of him when he was in San Francisco. Last year he did play at an elite level, but for the last two games. And so there is at least a thought out there, or the possibility that, hey, this guy was a strong-arm guy coming out of college. Everybody loved him, and now he's finally reaching his potential. So theoretically, the ceiling is higher for Darnold. We'll see if that actually is the case.
I think the Seahawks have a little bit of Geno Smith upgrade. All right, we got one of the Jets draft picks who is now kind of hitting his peak after a rough ride. Why don't we can just replicate what we have with Geno? The team that I want to focus on, Nick, is the Vikings. And I know you're not high on Sam Darnold, but I think contract is not huge. It's not something the Vikings couldn't do. To look at 14 wins, and we've seen the 14 wins, 4,000 passing yards. I know I'm blue in the face with this graphic, but these are great quarterbacks all time. So the fact that I'm not saying it's hubris from the Vikings organization, but the idea that you can just look at 14 wins and 4,000 passing yards and say, like, you know what, it wasn't him, it was actually us, I think could come back to bite them. Do you buy that?
Okay. No, I mean, not really. And Brew, I want to tell you something. You're off the hook now, buddy. Because we now when viewers or podcast listeners, as Wilds likes to, remind us that we have, think of
multimedia.
The worst repeated first things first graphic. They no longer are going to think of the Jimmy G graphic of lore. They're going to think of this
Josh, is there an error on the graphic?
No, it's true. It's just like the Jimmy G graphic was true. It was true, but it is so absurd when you look at it that it almost feels like it almost proves the inverse of your point, which is, well, we are looking at 6, no doubt, first ballot Hall of Famers, or in Rodgers and Mahomes' case, future, and Brady, I guess, future first ballot Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
We're looking at, 5 of the 10 greatest quarterbacks ever. Kurt Warner's right on the fringe there, probably. And then 2 guys last year. In the same year, same guys, none of whom think they are the best player on their own team. So that's the first point. The second point is, even remove that graphic from it. I think you, Wilds, are under, and maybe this is one where you're right and the teams are wrong, and I say that sincerely, but you are not putting the value on having spent a first-round pick on a player that teams do.
No.
When the Vikings spent a first-round pick on J.J. McCarthy, he has to be their starter within the first 2 years. They wanted him to be the starter the first year. Like in the modern NFL, nobody is sitting 2 years, particularly a guy that they thought was going to start year 1. And so I think that anything short of, a deep playoff run, maybe even a Super Bowl, anything short of a Super Bowl appearance, this was going to be Darnold's fate. The difference, I think, was if he had played better in the playoffs, in the one playoff game, maybe they would have franchised him and then traded him. But I think they understood if we franchise him at $40 million, that he might not be tradable. And there might not be someone willing to give us anything where it's worth tying up that much of our cap. So you call it hubris. I call it a team saying we're okay risking a lower floor because we are chasing a higher ceiling. The same way after a 13-win season with Kirk Cousins, they shortly thereafter drafted a quarterback in the first round.
Yeah, the fact is this, and they knew this. They weren't that close with Sam Darnold, right? They were really, right. 14, it seems like it with the 14 wins, and it was a great regular season, but we saw what happened when the games mattered, Detroit, and then in the playoffs, and they didn't play well at all. 18 points in the last 2 games combined. That offense fell apart. So they weren't close.